Today with Eye of the Storm Astrology, and today we're going to be doing a historical chart analysis of King Louis the XIV of France. So, one of the things I like to do with astrology is to look at different charts throughout history because they provide a really good basis for being able to use as a source of study. So that's what we're going to be getting into today next. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at the chart of King Louis the XIV of France, who is known as the Sun King. Now, this is a interesting one if you're a historical fan. Louis was famous for many things, one of them being the longest reigning sovereign of any king. So he reigned for, I believe it was like 72 years and 110 days, if I remember off the top of my head, something like that. So quite a long time. And during that time, he was very successful. Not only did he create a lot of famous buildings like the Palace of Versailles, which is still, famous today. I think it's like toured by like 15 million people annually every year. So it's one of the most popular tourist spots in the world. Very, very beautiful piece of architecture if you're a person that appreciates that type of thing, as well as so many other buildings. He was also very militarily. He was also very successful as a military leader. He was successful in passing down his reign, these different types of things. So we're going to look at his chart today and kind of look at it from the historical perspective of seeing how we can see what we've already what has occurred in history already, because it gives us a really good basis for being able to then go and study a chart. And Louis' chart is a really good example of, again, why it's so important to use a sidereal chart in your calculations. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and pull this up, and we'll go ahead and get into this. So, very interesting things to note here. First off, one of the most obvious things that I can see, and this is a huge distinction between, sidereal and tropical calculations, is when you look at Louis' chart, using the correct calculation, sidereal ones, we can see something very obvious. And it's if we look at the position of his sun. The sun is in Leo, its own sign. So you have the sun, which represents the king, Leo, which is the sign of the king. And it's in this 11th house, which deals with like a larger social network circle, larger things. We also want to keep in mind that the 11th and 10th houses, depending on what time of the year it is, those are going to be about where the midday sun is. So this is also where the sun receives its full directional strength. So why is this important? Well, Louis' nickname, it's literally in his nickname, historically he was known for, and this isn't based off of charts, this is just who he's known for, was known as the Sun King because he had such a long, prosperous reign. Well, what do we see? We see the sun in Leo. You could not get an astrological position that would indicate a nickname like that or a title like that as the Sun King more than a sun in Leo. And especially even being in the 11th house, 10th house, that type of area in the chart, it's really going to show a king who is always in the open. Louis was known for every day, his entire routine from the time he got up to the time he went to bed was completely observed. And he was known for being on a schedule. Like you could predict exactly what he was going to be doing. It was said that you were 200 miles away, you could look at your watch and see what time of day it was, and you would know what the king would be up to at that time. Well, that's very indicative of this position of the sun, because what does the sun do? The sun is reliable. In Vedic astrology, we refer to the sun as a square. It's reliable, it's steady. This is why it represents like masculine energy. But the sun rises and sets every day, when it's going to rise and when it's going to set. It's going to rise every day in the east, and it's going to set in the west. This is something that you can count on. It's reliable. This is the same quality. And, when people are looking for a king or a leader or some type of person like that, that's a quality that they're looking for, is that steadiness, that reliability, knowing what to expect. So this is one of the reasons why Louis was so successful in his reign. So very, very obvious. Now, if we were to look at this in a tropical chart, it would put his sun in Virgo. So the sun in an earth sign. Does that sound like something that would get the title of the Sun King? No. Like, but sun in Leo, you could not get more descriptive than that if you wanted to give a title for it. And we'll continue to break this down further, but I just wanted to highlight that point right off the bat, because it just makes it such an obvious point as to why it's important to use the correct calculations, because if you don't, you're going to be missing a lot. As well as when we really look at the nakshatras in his chart, a lot is revealed, as always goes the case with nakshatras. And again, that's another big reason why I choose to practice Vedic astrology. So let's start off by digging into his lagna, into his ascendant, and then we'll look at some other very important things that are going on and to how those actually played into his personality, the way he reigned, why he was successful across really all the different areas of his life. This chart is this is a very, very strong chart. There's no wonder that this person karmically had this much success they did in their life and left an imprint on history that still affects people to this day. So that's quite a lot to accomplish in one person's life. So first off, we can see he is going to be a Libra ascendant, Libra Lagna, in the nakshatra of Vishaka nakshatra. Now, he also has Neptune in Vishaka, and then he has Jupiter in the first house here as well, but it is in Swati nakshatra, and Uranus is in Chitra nakshatra. So all of the nakshatras that are represented in Libra are present in Louis' chart, and that's very interesting to note, because they're nakshatras that contain a lot of variance in the way they actually go about doing things. So first off, Vishaka nakshatra in Lagna. Vishaka nakshatra is an extremely strategic nakshatra. It is one that it's all about having goals. These people are very goal oriented. Once they accomplish a goal, they're not satisfied with it. They have to move on to the next thing. So there can be this theme of never being completely satisfied, and it's not that they're not satisfied with like what they did or they're not proud of something. It's just that they don't want to stop there. They're very task oriented people, very, like I said, very strategic minded, very logical people. We can also see Vishaka nakshatra has a few different symbols. One is that of a bridge or an archway, but the symbol that one that's very popular with it is that of what's known as a victory arch. Now, for those of you who don't know, historically, a victory arch was a monument that back whenever they would have a massive battle or a war and they achieved some great victory, they would build this arch, this monument to it. And whenever they would parade, they would then march their soldiers, march their army under that. And, there would be scenes and depictions of the battle, engraved into it and stuff. And these are very popular all over the world, whether it's in India, you would see them in Greece, Rome, all these different ancient nations. Victory arches were a thing. But this theme of the victory arch is one that we have with Vishaka. Again, it being a very goal-oriented nakshatra. So they're all about setting that goal, strategically moving towards it, achieving it, and then moving on to the next one. Throughout Louis's reign, that is very much what he did, whether it was militarily, politically, with reforms he was making in the law and in the country, with buildings and public works and projects that he was working on. He was constantly working on different things, constantly had new ideas, was very strategic in the way he went about achieving those. And he was very good at being able to use different resources to unite people of different backgrounds and different talents and bring them together in order to achieve the result that he wanted. And this is also a very interesting theme that we see with Vishaka nakshatra, is it's also symbolized by a bridge. So they're very good at connecting what you could say is two different, banks of the river, two different sides of the river. So if you see people who may have different talents or different skills or even completely different diverging viewpoints, Vishaka nakshatra is very skilled at being able to see the talents and the use in each of those and be able to bring them together in such a way that it actually creates a harvest. That's something Vishaka Nakshatra said to do, is that it needs water and fire to bring those together, or water and earth to bring these together in order to create a harvest. So it's always trying to unite opposites in order to create something. The deity that rules Vishaka Nakshatra is known as Indragni. So this is a very interesting deity because it's actually you could see it two ways. You could see it as a combination of two deities, but you could also see it as a single deity in itself. So Indragni is Indra and Agni. So Indra being uh, the king of the gods, but the lord of thunderstorms, rain. So we have this element of water, of storms and nourishment that comes with that. And Lord Agni, who is the lord of fire. So these are two of the most important deities in Vedic culture. And anytime there's a Vedic ritual, everything starts with an offering to Lord Agni, Lord Indra. These are always given praise in Vedic rituals when properly done. So in this nakshatra, we can see the uniting of what appear to be these opposite energies, but that are also very primal, very powerful energies, and bringing these together in order to create and to manifest the things you want. And throughout Louis's reign, no matter what it was he was wanting to do, you can see this is something he was very, very good at. Now, Neptune also being here right on the ascendant, I really like to look at the outer planets as working not only more on there's a couple ways you can look at them. I observe them, one is generational markers, because they move so slow that entire generations are going to have the same position. The only thing that's going to change is where it is in their chart, right? Another good way to think of it is that they work on an unconscious level, because they're not the visible grahas. They're not visible planets that we see with our eye. There's something that, they're so far out there we can't see them with our naked eye. So they work on a more unconscious level. The other way I like to look at them is as the Trimurti. I like to think of Uranus with that creative energy of Brahma, Neptune being Vishnu, the preserver, and Pluto being Shiva, the destroyer. And when you think of them in this context, seeing Neptune right on the ascendant, or you could think of it this way, seeing Vishnu right on the ascendant and at 29 degrees, which means it's critical. So there's a karma there that he was bringing with that energy from a past life into this life. Vishnu is the preserver. And what did Louis do? He was preserved as he had historically has the longest living reign of any king, of any sovereign, ruled for over 70 years. A lot of people don't even live that long, and he ruled the country for that long successfully. One of the most powerful countries in the world at the time. So, and created monuments that still to this day are some of the most beautiful structures in the world architecturally. Very impressive things. This is where we can really see that influence of Neptune, that this preservation is being able to keep things for a very long time. And even long after his death, those buildings he made are still preserved. A lot of the laws that he put into place still have influence on laws in the modern day. So his reign still very much, its impact even felt into today. So that's something that's very interesting to see, that element of Neptune there being equivalent to Vishnu, being that preservative energy. Then we want to look here at Jupiter. So anytime you have Jupiter in the logna, that's always very good. Also, it being in a friendly sign like Libra, Jupiter and Venus can do well. They have some synastry between them. And Venus is obviously, the ruler here, and it rules the first house because it's ruling Libra. So Jupiter, when it comes into Libra, the person can become, not only will they expand, but especially in areas of like wealth, because Libra can deal with things like wealth, economy, law, negotiating between people, trying to settle disputes, these type of things. Jupiter here becomes very good at that. He becomes a teacher, he becomes a guru, someone that people look to. He expands, so he can create a lot of wealth for someone in this position. And Swati is a nakshatra that is all about a person being an individual. It's known as the stars of individuality, the star of independence. Chitra Nakshatra also has that same type of energy. There's three nakshatras out of all 27 that are made of a single yogatara, a single star. So these nakshatras, when you see them in a chart, the person becomes extremely unique. Yeah, even if you see one of them. If you see all, two or three of them, then you really get a person who is a very, very unique person. They're going to do things in their own way. This is something we can see going on with Louis, especially with two of them being in his first house here. So that's definitely going to have a big impact. So Swati is the nakshatra that is really all about communication, being very grounded and stable, but also wanting to be free. And these were things that we definitely could see that if we look back at Louis and his personality and how he was very stable, but he also wanted to be free to explore ideas and explore projects and to question things and to do the things that he wanted to do. He was known for keeping his word as a sovereign, which is not a normal thing to see. And Swati is all about honesty. It's a very honest nakshatra. So that's something we can see. Now, where Uranus is, you could associate that with the energy of Brahma or the creator energy. So he's going to be a very creative person. And then Chitra Nakshatra, this is a nakshatra that is also a nakshatra that is all about creation. So we have a dual synastry here going on between both the planet and the nakshatra. So you could say with the sign too, but definitely with the planet and the nakshatra, they both have a very strong theme of creation. Now, Chitra Nakshatra is symbolized by a pearl or a jewel, like a diamond, something that takes a long time to create. It starts from a place of frustration, but it ends up through that frustration and through that process ends up creating a beautiful thing. Well, what do we see are some of the things he's created? Like if you look at Versailles and how massive that place is, that was a project that took a lot of planning, a lot of time. There was something, maybe some irritation or something that he wanted to solve that made him think about those things and undertake a project that took a lot of time and pressure and organization and strategy. We see all the skills of these nakshatras we've been talking about coming into play to be able to accomplish a massive project like that. And then when it's done, it's literally known as one of the jewels of the world. It's a world wonder. It's a beautiful thing. And the other projects he worked on as well are also, extremely beautiful, but that's definitely probably the most famous of them. So we can definitely see that theme here. And, I could keep going on analyzing just this first house in detail, but I want to just hit on all this stuff very quickly and then continue around the chart so we can cover everything because there is a lot here. And if this is something you guys are really enjoying, let me know in the comments below and I can do more in-depth breakdowns because another reason I love analyzing famous historical figures like this is because their life was so well documented. And Louis was a very great case of that. Like they literally documented everything he did, when he got ill, what type of treatments they were giving him. If you want to study death in a chart, finding a famous historical figure that you can figure out exactly when they died, that is a very, very useful thing to be able to study from a historical analysis point of view. Not saying, that is condoning or supporting government or anything like that. This is objectively studying things through history, through using the science of Vedic astrology. That's what we're doing here. So some other things I really want to note in this chart, though, is how many planets are so well positioned. So I mentioned before here, we have the sun in Leo, so it's its own sign. We have Mercury in Virgo, it's in its own sign. Virgo is also Mercury's Mula Trachona sign, which in other words, it's a sign where its strength really comes out. It does very, very well here, performs very well here. You have Moon in Cancer in its own sign, sitting with Venus, who it's friendly with, so another great position. You have Saturn in Capricorn in its own sign in the fourth house, like well positioned. These are all planets that are all in their own signs. So four major planets all sitting there, and then all the other planets well positioned. There isn't a single poorly positioned planet in this chart, not a single one. So, let's look at some of these different things. First off, let's dive back into this sun here. So first off, when we see a sun in a chart, not only is it indicator of our soul and our ego, you can think of it as the throne of our soul, but it's also indication of the father. Well, who was Louis's father? Well, he was also a king of France. So this is an indicator of a father who was also very strong in his reign, was very, very successful, did well, and was a king as well. Then we even see a moon in Cancer that also will show that the mother was well placed in royalty, but there's some very interesting things to note about his mother that we can see coming when we'll look at the next shock that are here. But we can see both the mother and father, moon and sun, both being in their own signs and in the 10th and 11th houses. So they're seen, they're out in the open. We can see here that his family was royalty. So he was karmically, when he came into this incarnation, this was the role he had to fulfill. Okay. Very interesting thing to note. Now, if we look at this sun further, looking at the nakshatra of Purva Palguni. So there are three kind of sets of nakshatras that work as pairs. And there will always be a Purva and an Uttara. So these are the Palgunis are the first of these. So Purva Palguni is the early fruit. And Uttara Palguni, which is where his Mercury is, and we'll talk about in a second, this is the later fruit. Now, the Palgunis are symbolized by the Purva Palguni being the foot of the royal bed. It's literally symbolized by a royal bed. And Uttara Palguni is the head of the royal bed. So Sun and Mercury both being here, it's like owning the whole royal bed, so to speak. So again, this theme of royalty coming up. Now, Purva Palguni, these nakshatras they're very sensual nakshatras. They're all about creativity, fertility, bringing things together, creating fruits, creating children. This whole energy of creation, again, is coming in very strong here with both these nakshatras of Purva Palguni and Uttara Palguni, where Sun and Mercury are placed. Now, Purva Palguni is the beginning of something, the initiation of a project. These also have a lot to do with contracts and paperwork, with law, these type of things. So Purva Palguni would be like the person who drew the initial law or drafts the initial paperwork, for, a mortgage or something, someone who's underwriting the contract, so to speak. Then and Uttara Palguni can go in and give like that final approval, like the final underwrite, the final approval, the final sign off, and take the project to completion. If you were looking at like a real estate deal, Purva Palguni is when you're opening the contract, you're opening escrow, and then Uttara Palguni is when you're closing the contract. You're finally closing everything out. Title is transferred to the new party, et cetera, right? This type of energy, or if we were bringing it into the theme of like reproduction or into dating, Purva Palguni is the initiation of a relationship or the initiation of the creation of that child. And Uttara Palguni is where that relationship is matured or that child has been brought into the world. So we can kind of understand the themes here. So when we see both of these here, what we can see with Sun and Purva Palguni is that for part of his soul, what he was here to do was to create beautiful things, to initiate things, to start things, and to act as a leader, to be a leader that initiated change in the world that he was leading in. So he would come up with these ideas for these projects, and he would put them into motion. Then we would see this is where Mercury would come in here. So now he has Mercury and Virgo in the 12th house in Uttara Palguni. So let's look at these. So Virgo's the internal or the feminine expression of Mercury. So this is where Mercury, which is our logic, our intellect, and our communication, it goes inward. So that's why they become very good problem solvers. They'll have a lot of people approach them with their problems, and they help them with that. These type of things. That's something that obviously a king they had to deal with that a lot. You could also see this with his all these Libra placements in his ascendant, especially Vishaka. This theme of having to negotiate between different people or try to settle disputes. That was definitely part of the role of a sovereign during these times. So this was something he had to deal with. But with Mercury in Virgo, the 12 in Virgo, he's gonna spend a lot of time thinking internally, and then it's also placed in the 12th house, which is known as the house of losses. So, so for him, he would have spent a lot of time thinking, communicating, speaking with people, but it would have been done in a more private, reserved away place. The 12th house is like foreign places or private places, or places that are reserved. They're set aside from the general public. We can definitely see this is where you go to speak to a king in the palace, or in he would his chambers. He wants to see these things come to fruition, so he would want to initiate these projects, but he would always spend a lot of time thinking and communicating about how do we bring these to fruition, how do we actually make everything happen, how do we see it be, get the reward from the project. In fact, the word fruition, that was something historically used to describe him, that he spent a lot of time wanting to see his projects to fruition. That specific word, if you look it up, watch documentaries about it, you'll see that's a word they used to describe him. The Palguni Nikshatras are where that is coming from. Is the Purva Palguni and the Uttara Palguni. He was all about starting projects and then wanting to see them completed, which is why he started projects and saw them to completion in his lifetime. He had such a long reign that he had the ability to do that, and he spent a lot of time and energy doing these type of things. The Palgunis are also very strategic nikshatras as well. But when it comes to sensuality, another area of Louis that we can see is not only did he produce children successfully, but he had many different mistresses. He was known for having a very strong drive, which is something we can definitely see with the Palgunis, as well as some of the other nikshatras he has in his chart, such as Moon and Islisha. Islisha is another very sensual, very sexy type of nikshatra. Same with Vishaka, Chitra. These are also nikshatras that can very much have that type of energy to them. So that was another thing that we can see, that if we look back historically, he was definitely a king that he had many different mistresses, but never to the point that it like really ever caused any issues for him. Unlike other kings, for example, if we were to look at someone like Henry VIII, obviously his track with women was not so good, right? Louis didn't have those type of issues in his relationships that he experienced when he was in power. Another interesting one to note here is this. Let's go ahead and actually I'll look at Saturn last. Let's look at Moon first. So Moon here in Cancer in Islisha Nakshatra, and it's with Venus as well, in Pushya. So this is in the 10th house. We can definitely see Venus in the 10th. That is always going to be an indication for wealth, especially when it's well placed like this. But the Nikshatra Islisha is the one I really want to hone in on. So early on in Louis' reign, his father died, and his mother, was kind of in charge of things and stewardship until he grew of age to take over. Now, she was extremely strategic, maybe even slightly manipulative about the way she did that, because she wanted to rule the country the way she wanted to through her son. Now, as Louis came of age, that was something that he eventually put a stop to, and then took over control himself more. And then that's when, he really started stepping into his own and making things happen in the way that he wanted to. And he really kind of started to step into and mature and into that role of that title of the Sun King, as to be remembered as. Now, Islisha Nakshatra is one that is symbolized by serpents. It's ruled by the Nagas, and it is a nakshatra that, as I mentioned before, is very sensual, very sexy, but it also deals with being extremely strategic. It can deal with manipulation. It can deal with doing things in kind of a sneaky way. Not always, but that is something it can be. And that is definitely something we could see if we look back at his mother and how she was trying to rule and control the country through using him. That was definitely something we can see here. That being said, he still had a relatively good relationship with the mother, she lived for, a decent, pretty decent period of time. So we can definitely see that with a moon being well placed here with Venus and things. And again, lots of wealth is something that we can very much see coming in through here. So, this is just a very, very well supported chart. We also see that the first house ruler, Venus, um, is in the 10th house. So when you have the first and the eighth house ruler in the 10th house, it's going to create a person that not only has a long life, but is very well supported throughout their life, especially with Venus being in a nakshatra like Pushya, which is symbolized by a cow udder or a lotus blossom. So it's all about nurturing, giving, being nurtured. If you wanted to summarize like all the nakshatras and hone in on one is like what you can consider the mother nakshatra, that's Pushya. So when we see Venus here sitting with Moon, in that type of placement, there was still nourishment, there was still that type of thing going on. But at the same time, Moon being in Asletia, we can definitely see the mother still had some plans and schemes of her own that she was doing. Next, really interesting thing to see here is both Saturn and as well as the Aruda Lagna is sitting here. But Saturn retrograde, it's sitting in the sign of Capricorn in the 4th house, and it's in the Shravana Nakshatra. So Saturn in Capricorn, obviously Saturn rules Capricorn, but Capricorn and Saturn are both associated with law. They're both associated with governments, with kings. So when we see a Saturn in Capricorn and in the 4th house, which is the house of home, the house of heart, and then you see like that in combination with a sun in Leo in the 11th and a moon in Cancer in the 10th, it is very, very easy to see why karmically this soul came into into that incarnation with the experience of being a king, being a ruler, because those were the karmas and things that their soul was fulfilling and playing out. So Saturn in Capricorn, you can definitely see a king or ruler, but especially when you place that in the 4th. Now, you also want to place this look at this in conjunction of this also happens to be his Aruda Lagna. For those of you who don't know, the Aruda Lagna is like the costume we're supposed to wear. If you imagine an actor in a movie, they have a certain role they're supposed to play, and they have a certain costume when they play that role. And as they do that kind of that becomes part of their character. It allows them to play that role better and then, give us value by giving us entertainment. Well, the soul does the same thing. We all have a unique gift that we have to give to the world. And our Aruda Lagna is our uniform or our costume that we wear while we do that. So his Aruda Lagna is this Saturn and Capricorn energy, and it also happens to be in Dhanishta Nakshatra, which is a nakshatra known as the star of wealth. It's known for people here get a lot of wealth. And Shravana Nakshatra, where Saturn is sitting, is a nakshatra that is all known about like having lots of people bring you information, listening to lots of different people. It's associated with an ear is one of the symbols for it. It also has an association with music, and this music was another thing Louis was known for enjoying, music and the arts. He would bring philosophers and thinkers and performers, all sorts of different people, all to his court and listen to all of them and bring all their different talents together. And because of that, his court became one of the wealthiest in the world. Well, this is where we can see that combination of that Shravana and Dhanishta Nakshatra happening. And again, where was it happening? It was happening in his court, in his home, in his 4th house, where things are convenient for him. The 4th house represents things that are convenient for us. Think about food, for example. The food that you have in your refrigerator is much more convenient for you to get than the food that is out at the grocery store, or even more so, say you have to go out to the woods and hunt it and kill it and process it and etc. Right? There's levels of convenience to things. The 4th house represents things that are convenient to us. So his court became a place where he would bring all these different people of different influence and different talents that became very convenient for him to have access to all their knowledge, and because of that he created a lot of wealth for himself. He created a very successful, and France did very well under him. Now, some other things to note here is also the presence of Ketu and Ardra Nakshatra. Now, earlier you might remember that I mentioned Ardra Nakshatra in conjunction with Swati and Chitra, that these are the three nakshatras that are made of a single Yogatara. So people become very unique there, very individual, and they stand out. They're just very, very, really unique is the best word. Really, the best word to describe all of them together. Um, So when you see, someone has Chitra and Swati in the Lagna, and then in their ninth house, they also have Ardra, he has all three of these nakshatras present in his chart. And he was known for being a very unique king, a very individualistic person, a very free thinking person. He could be very stormy and destructive as well. And this is where we see this energy of Ardra coming in. So Ardra is symbolized by a teardrop or a storm. It represents being able to destroy things in order to purify them and create something new. So when we see his K2, the south node of the moon here, we see that he naturally had a ability to have a mastery over that level of destruction. So, during war campaigns, these type of things, he was a very effective battlefield commander, extremely strategic, could destroy his enemies, and did so when he needed to. And then after that, new treaties would be made. The storm would pass. The problems would be, taken care of, and then a new day shines again, so to speak. And then more order is reestablished. That type of theme was something we can see throughout his reign as he went on different military campaigns. We can also see the same thing going on with this Rahu and Mars in the third house here. Now, Mars is in Mula Nakshatra, which is directly across from Ardra, and we have Rahu in Purva Ashada Nakshatra. So Mula Nakshatra is all about the tangled roots, getting to the roots of things, finding out what's at the very base cause of things. It's also about uncovering lies, discovering the truth, finding. It's a very spiritual nakshatra, deals with transformation, transmutation, these type of themes. Now, Purvashada Nakshatra, where Rahu is, this is an extremely strategic nakshatra. It's all about going to war, so to speak. That forward action of moving towards a goal and accomplishing something. So when we see Purvashada and Mula here, with Ardra and then with Vishaka as well, very, a lot of talent when it came towards strategy, whether that was applied militarily, economically, politically. Louis was very successful in all the different areas of his life. This was something that he did. He was also known for being a religious person, so we can definitely see that with this Rahu and Mars in Sagittarius in this third house. Both Purva, Shada, and Mula are nakshatras that are very drawn towards spirituality, wanting to find the higher truth in things. Purva Ashada also deals with, it's ruled by the goddess Apis, which is the goddess of rivers. And one of the things we see with like the Palace of Versailles and other works that Louis did is there was always a lot of water features. The fountains, actually, there are some of the most famous features there. We could see Rahu with Purva Ashada here. Because Rahu's our desires and things he wanted. So he really had the desire to want to have these water features, to have these beautiful things. Had to be very strategic in knowing how to do that. It dealt with having to run plumbing and piping, which we can see come through with like a Mars and Mula Nakshatra. So even the type of engineering that went into his buildings and the projects that he did, you can see coming in with the type of placements of these planets and these nakshatras in his chart. So some very, very interesting things. And again, we could get into the D10 chart. We could study different historical dates throughout his chart, his date of death, etc. There's so much to see here that I think of all the charts I've studied, I think this is probably one of the most fascinating charts I've studied, especially from the historical lens, as well as I'll probably say this is probably one of the best placed charts I've ever seen. This is a very, very strong chart. So if you want to study yogas or strong positions in a chart, things like this is a very good one for you to study. Even like I said, even if you don't agree with government or kings or any of that, this is a historic thing that happened. The person's long dead. You're just studying history using the science and the lens of Vedic astrology to do that. And when you do that, it's a very, very useful tool for being able to gain a lot more insight into these different type of things. But I wanted to keep this one relatively short. I got to go pick up my kiddos here pretty soon from school. So I'm going to stop sharing here and wrap this one up. I'll check to see if we have any questions here before we do that. Let's see. Make sure. Okay, yeah, I don't think we have any questions on this one. So yeah, we should be good to go here. Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in, anybody. If anybody does have any questions afterwards, any insights or things that you thought were valuable, definitely let me know in the comments. And if this is something you would like me to do a more in-depth analysis of, maybe his D10 chart or his death chart, so studying death through astrology using his chart, these type of things, let me know if that any of those things are things that are in that interest you at all. Another quick little housekeeping thing. I recently did a presentation at the Seed Conference, Seed 5 Metamorphosis. So thanks to Brandon Martin, Nate Cap, everybody else who put so much work into putting that on. All the speakers did a really amazing job. I definitely recommend everybody go check them out on YouTube or on the One Great Work Network as well. You'll be able to check out the full 2 full days of a presentation that they put together. It was great. A lot of different speakers, a lot of awesome presentations and information covered. My presentation, I didn't actually make about Vedic astrology this one. I did a presentation called Our Own Worst Enemy, How We Keep Ourselves Small. And I really dove into mindset and the difference between victimhood mindset, warrior mindset, and what are some of the areas in life that we limit ourselves because of ideas and assumptions that we hold on to, that maybe by becoming more nuanced in the way we view things, we open ourselves up to a lot more opportunities and we can actually grow much quicker by dropping a lot of those things. So if you guys are interested in checking that out, I'll go ahead and upload that presentation onto the channel as well. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate you as always, and I will see you in the next one.